The National Butterfly Center is a project of the North American Butterfly Association, and we're located here and anchor this section of the Lower Rio Grande Valley Wildlife Conservation Corridor. It is the NABA section that includes us and a National Wildlife Refuge tract and Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park. We are a habitat restoration project committed to growing connections between people and plants and wild butterflies to help people understand the intimate connection between our native flora and our native fauna. We've received an awful lot of media attention over the last year and a half because on July 20th, 2017, 9 months before there was any congressional vote or funding allocated for border wall, we found government contractors on our property. They were cutting down trees, mowing down brush, and widening a road from the levee to the Rio Grande River without any notice or any due process on our private property. This contractor was an Alaska National Corporation, TKGAC, and they were sent here by Customs and Border Protection to do all of that work ahead of the border wall. That's what they explained to us. Of course, for several weeks after that, the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers all denied that any of that was going on or that they had any hand in it until I met with Chief Manuel Padilla of the Rio Grande Valley sector, who came out with posters and lots of information and showed me the drawings for the border wall, the schematics for the enforcement zone, and their plan, everything that they intended to do to our property. In March of 2018, when the Omnibus Appropriations Act was passed by Congress, $450 million were allocated for 33 new miles of levee border wall in Hidalgo and Starr counties. And we are ground zero for that. The first 6 miles of new border wall to be built in about a decade will begin in this section of the Lower Rio Grande Valley Wildlife Conservation Corridor. And the bulldozers are supposed to roll in late February or early March. Right now we're on the Rio Grande River. This right here is the international border between the United States and Mexico. This is the southernmost end of our property. We have 100 acres that run from Military Highway to the Rio Grande River. And our property is bisected by the Mission Main Canal and levee. That is where the border wall will be built, putting 70% of our land between the border wall and the Rio Grande River in a new territory that my boss has named Mexigro. One thing most people don't understand is that the border wall is not being built on the border. If that were the case, they would have to build it here in the middle of the river, which is the international boundary between the two countries. Instead, the border wall is being built inland, more than 2 miles inland at some places like at Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park. On our property, it will be up to 1.2 miles inland, thereby creating a landing and staging area for illicit traffic. You asked if we've experienced drug running or human trafficking. I've been here 6.5 years. When I started in 2012, we had a problem. We had a Border Patrol agent who was stationed at the canal crossing there at the levee. And on Tuesday and Wednesday mornings, around 8 a.m. when we opened, he would disappear. At the same time, a little red Mercedes would pull into the parking lot and tell all of us, And we would stand outside our cars while the scouts crossed in their vehicles, and then the truck would run down Sherbach to the river, load up with drugs, and run back. The scouts would cross again, and then the guy in the red Mercedes would tell all of us goodbye and drive out of the parking lot. And I began reporting it to Border Patrol. And I began keeping a diary and a log and striking up conversations with the Border Patrol agent that I named our sentry. He had a lot of questions for me too, like when was I going to get transferred out? Have we seen people? I can tell you about 3 different incidents in the 6.5 years I've been here. One was 5 little boys in 2013 or 2014 when we had the surge of unaccompanied minors coming across. And the first little boy to walk out of the brush over on the other side of the levee came out with the biggest smile on his face, just gleeful at the butterflies, the volume and variety. And he asked, "What is this place? I've never seen anything like it. So many butterflies." And we explained where he was and asked who he was, and he gave us his first name. He was about 5 years old, and then another little boy came out of the woods, and he was about 7. And then another little boy came out of the woods who was maybe 10. And then 2 other boys. So we had 5 unaccompanied minors come out of the woods. And we took them into the groundskeeper's building and gave them Pedialyte and bananas and called Border Patrol and had them taken in for processing. We had another incident where a man and a woman and an infant were standing up on the levee, and one of my staff approached them and said, "Are you lost?" They explained they were from Honduras and they were waiting for La Migra. They were waiting to be picked up by Border Patrol. They had an infant. So we took them into the visitors pavilion, offered them the bathrooms, gave them water, and called Border Patrol. The baby's name was Elvis, which is why this is particularly memorable, because it shows some of the common threads that bind all of us. We didn't get a chance to find out if the father or the mother was the Elvis fan or had the parent that was the Elvis fan, but they had named their baby Elvis. The third incident involved, I got a call from staff on a Saturday morning that a very, very, very pregnant woman was walking through the Hackberry Trail escorted by 2 men. Like they said, "Boss, you better call an ambulance. She might give birth here." And we called Border Patrol, and they came to pick her up. Because one, that's our legal responsibility. And we are all for securing our borders. And at the time, we were working with Border Patrol as an agency that was humane, that had a different attitude toward everyone and everything than we have experienced since the summer of 2017. Since the summer of 2017, the agents on the ground, as well as their leadership, have been antagonistic, aggressive, hostile, destructive of our property, violated our civil rights, tried to usurp our property. We have a de facto occupation of our land. It's been a real radical transformation at a time when immigration is at a 42-year low. We have more than 6,000 school children here every year. Those are unaccompanied minors whose parents sign permission slips for them to come frolic in the wilderness on the banks of the Rio Grande River because it's safe. Here, have you seen an invasion? Anyone crossing? We're not under assault. There is no threat. And if there really were, why not boats on the river instead of a border wall? For the $450 million allocated for 33 new miles of border wall, the government could purchase over 800 interceptor gunboats and line them up end to end on the 800 or less miles of navigable Rio Grande River. And that would actually stop drugs or humans or weapons from landing on U.S. soil. But that's not the goal. There's too much money to be made from all of that arriving and Border Patrol having more time to apprehend them and send them off to the for-profit prison corporations. The border wall is going to have many negative consequences to our economy, to our environment, to the ecology. If they succeed in building this 33 miles, so far they've only awarded contracts for 6 miles here and 14 miles to the east of us. But if they do all 33 miles, they will be bulldozing about 6,000 acres of vegetation behind that 33 miles. Most of what they're bulldozing will be a part of this remnant of native habitat that provides breeding and feeding, sustenance for the remnant of native wildlife that we have in the Rio Grande Valley. That wildlife isn't just birds and butterflies who, for the most part, can fly over a 36-foot tall wall, which is what we're getting. We're getting an 18-foot tall concrete vertical slab with 18-foot tall steel bollards on top. What can't get through it are all of the terrestrial life forms, many of which are already threatened or endangered and protected under state and federal law. But for this project, the government has waived 28 federal statutes duly enacted by Congress for the protection of people and the things that we value, like grave sites and historic landmarks and people. They've waived the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act. They've waived the Migratory Bird Treaty because they're going to be bulldozing tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of trees during spring nesting season. So when you wonder about the impact, it's not just going to impact us and the volume and variety of wildlife that we experience and can support here, but when millions of baby birds are potentially bulldozed this spring, what's going to happen to the bird populations in Kansas and Michigan and Canada? The ripple effect is going to be felt across the United States. Environmental tourism to the Rio Grande Valley provides about $500 million a year. And the majority of the area impacted by the border wall will be wildlife conservation areas like the state park and the refuge tracks, the National Butterfly Center, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and Sable Palm Sanctuary, Audubon tracks, other pieces of land that constitute about 5% of the native habitat left in South Texas, according to Texas Parks and Wildlife. That remnant is going to be behind the border wall, restricting the range area for terrestrial wildlife and trapping all of them behind the border wall in the event of a flood. And while we're called the Rio Grande Valley, we're not a valley. We are a river delta. So flooding instances are regular and natural here, in spite of the dams and other things that have been put in place to secure the river and safeguard homes and businesses and things that exist here and have for centuries, like La Lomita Mission just downriver from us. I think it's important for people to do their research and to prioritize facts over their fears. As I said, immigration is at a 42-year low. Even with that, the majority of all illegal immigration involves people who came here legally and overstayed their visas. People who didn't leave after finishing school or their vacation or their work assignment. And the same is true with the drugs entering this country. They're coming through legal ports of entry, and infrastructure is critical there, but so is policing of our police forces. The corruption is rampant. Here on the border, we understand plata or plomo, which is, do you want the silver or the lead? You take the bribe or you take the bullet. And the cartels, when they want to move people and drugs through the bridges or the ports or the airport, they know how to do it. They know which lane to get in on the bridge and at what time, because the agent that's already been blackmailed or bought off is on duty there. That is the real problem in all of this. Not half-naked babies and, women with nothing but the clothing on their backs fleeing horrific violence, a complete nightmare in terms of living conditions.